Good morning to you.
No, that's fantastic. Yeah, just getting the recording started. Thank you so much for joining today. This is great. All right. Hey, everybody. So, happy Saturday, as we say these days. So, what we wanted to do is, as usual, get started with a bit of preparatory meditation, just to help us all to settle in, and then I'm going to move into the next topic, the next phase of the teachings that I've been giving over the last few weeks. So, in terms of settling in, we begin just as usual by finding a comfortable position. So, usually, the most helpful thing is just taking a deep breath in and out, allowing ourselves to stretch internally with that breath. And then with the second breath, we take just relaxing, just allowing ourselves to relax. And then with our third breath, just asking ourselves, what's important to us now? What's important right now? And then we can continue to just become aware of our body, the feeling of our breathing. And we're sensing what's going on inside of us, sensing the feelings inside our body. We normally spend so much of our time acting, moving. Now we focus just on being aware. And for the last couple of breaths, we just allow ourselves to relax, just settle in. And then we can open our eyes and arise from our meditation. Okay. So, as I mentioned in the past, what I'm doing in this sequence of classes is going through this program, the structure from the program called Search Inside Yourself that I had the opportunity to attend not too long ago. And I enjoyed the framework. It was sort of secular and modern, and I wanted to just pass that along. These are the six stages that they structure the program into. And over the past few weeks, we've looked at mindfulness, self-awareness, self-management. And now with this week, I'd like to start looking at motivation, at this topic of motivation. Now, each of these builds on the next. Mindfulness, just becoming aware and getting a bit of distance between ourself and our emotions, feelings, actions. Self-awareness is deepening that and becoming aware of how our sense of self arises and changes depending on what we're doing and what's going on in the mind. Then self-management, especially beginning to take a look at how we react and making sure we're reacting, we're responding in a wise way instead of just reacting. So motivation is about beginning to take advantage of this increased understanding of ourselves to bring more energy to our activities in our life, whether that's work or our relationships or hobbies or whatever it is. Motivation is about moving forward with energy in a way that's aligned with our internal states, and then looking at so that then opens the door further for empathy. So empathy is something that we can be building from the beginning, but these top two here are really focused more on others, and the bottom four focus more on ourselves. And so that's the progression and the foundation. Getting some understanding of ourself, and especially getting an understanding of ourself on a deep level, opens the door to being able to understand and help and work with others much more effectively. So just to recap a little bit what we talked about last week or last Tuesday on the topic of self-management, one of the aspects that I brought up was self-compassion. And there's a lot of the use of the word self, which is a bit ironic because the point is we're often way too preoccupied with ourselves. And there's a bit of an irony where our normal mode, our default mode in our lives is just to be thinking about ourselves all the time. How am I feeling? What am I doing? What's going to happen to me? And a lot of worries and very preoccupied with ourselves. And that is, it takes up a huge amount of our mental energy, huge amount of our mental space, especially the worrying bit, right? Worrying, what do people think of me? Which is really not something that is under our control. Abhishek gave me a quote a few weeks back that we are not driven by who we think we are. We're not driven by who others think we are. We're driven by what we think others think we are, which we definitely don't have any. It's hard for us to control, right? So the irony is that mindfulness, even though it's focusing internally, gradually the idea is to help us to become a bit less self-centered, a bit less self-focused, because what we're becoming focused on is what actually is going on inside of us. And so I've used this analogy in the past of ourself as being like an organization or like a corporation. A corporation is an artificial person, right? It can do things, it can own property, it's got a brand, you know. But if you try to track down exactly what is a corporation, think about like Microsoft's 200,000 people, I think, spread around the world. What is Microsoft like? What does it do? You know, it's so many people, right? It's very, very complex, but still there is a sense in which it can move coherently and act coherently and get stuff done. And we're the same, right? We've got 4 trillion cells inside our body. We've got, 100 billion neurons with all of their endless connections. We have internalized the thoughts and opinions of almost everyone we've ever listened to. Every time you listen to somebody, if you can remember it, you sort of internalize what's their point of view, and we've internalized the social viewpoint, right? So, so for example, I tend to identify myself a little bit more liberal on the political spectrum, but I've internalized in my mind some viewpoints from people who are conservative on the spectrum. It's just that I don't necessarily speak and act on the basis of that, but I've got those little voices going in my head, right? We've got all these little voices, maybe our parents' voices, our boss's voice, all of these little voices, but those voices are actually all just part of our mind. There's this huge complex landscape going on inside of us. But what happens is when we do something, we're forced to make a decision, and we can only decide one thing. We have to do one thing. So what am I going to have for breakfast? I can't have infinite things for breakfast. You've got to make a decision, choose one thing. And so our mind is constantly doing this sorting and filtering and coming to a single conclusion. And it's that sense of coming to one single conclusion that gives us a sense of self. We feel like we're just one person. Even though we've got this infinite complexity inside of us, we still just feel like, oh, there's just me. I'm just one person. The same way that Microsoft is just one company, even though it's existed for 40 years and the people are totally different. The products are totally different. Everything about it is totally different. There's nothing related aside from the name. It's the same as us. There's nothing about us that's the same as when we were a baby. I mean, our genes kind of, but not even the way our genes are expressing themselves. That changes. So with mindfulness, with self-awareness, with self-management, we're beginning to become more aware of this amazing swirl of what's going on. And it's a little bit like the CEO, the person we think we are is a little bit like the CEO of corporation self. So we are the CEO of Andrew Davis Global Enterprises. I remember once being asked in a job interview to list all of the C-level and VP level people that I knew. And so I'm a little bit nervous and sort of going through all my contacts. And I discovered how many of my friends are actually the CEO of, Eric Varela Global Enterprises. That's the easiest way to become a CEO, CEO of a one-person corporation. But you're already there, right? You're already that person. And so a wise CEO, though, needs to be listening to its people, to his or her people, needs to be gaining a lot of awareness, getting a lot of data from what's going on. So we, as a wise CEO of corporation self, we need to be getting a lot of data from our body. How's our body feeling? Oh, tense, miserable. Okay, we got to do something about that. How's our mind feeling? A bit anxious, depressed, or confident, or joyful? We need to know that, right? We're already engaged in leadership. It's just we're leading this unruly self. and the interesting thing is that as you scale up into working with other people, what you find is that your skill in working with other people is almost the same, is very similar to your skill in working with yourself. You begin to realize that other people have a huge range of different opinions and views, just like you do internally. They have different feelings at different times. They're a little bit unreliable, just like us. And the degree to which, and that's the one thing that's one big thing that gives older people an advantage in being in leadership roles, is they've seen a whole lot more of themselves. and they're a whole lot more aware of themselves than probably they were when they were younger. When you're younger, you have a much stronger sense that, okay, you know, I'm like this, because you're supposed to be like that. I'm very driven and whatever else because you're supposed to be like that. But then if you look at the reality, you begin to see, no, there's a lot more going on. Sometimes I'm lazy, sometimes I'm motivated, sometimes I'm kind, sometimes I'm self-centered. And you begin to see all that variety. And hopefully, as you learn to accept yourself more and more, you can learn to accept others more and more. And that's where self-compassion is very, very powerful. Beginning to look at yourself with this kindness, just an openness of mind, taking in all of these different aspects of yourself honestly and with kindness. As I was reflecting on this morning, I woke up way too early, like 3 a.m. with a headache, and I'd been getting these stress headaches or migraines or something like that for 20 years, something like that, 15 years. And I remember once going to my dentist and telling him, I sometimes get headaches, and he's like, do you know why? And he's like, oh, sometimes, if there's a lot going on at the meditation center that I was leading. And he's like, you mean like stress? And I'm like, well, I don't really like acknowledging that I experience stress. And he said, oh yeah, it's like my wife who's an OBGYN getting accidentally pregnant was the analogy he used. So I, as a meditation teacher, getting very stressed, right? Whoops. So I remember when I was young, reading these stories about these meditation masters who were able to have mind over body, and they were immune to pain and no matter what happened. And so if I get a headache, I'm always like, oh, I should be able to control this through the power of my mind, right? Why can't I overcome this through mind over matter? Oh, I'm obviously not a very good meditator, and it's very similar feeling to what I have at work, when I get asked to come into some meeting on my area of expertise, which is, the Salesforce development and so forth. And then people ask me questions, and internally I'm thinking, I have no idea. I barely understand what you just said, right? It's like this. And then I'm supposed to be this expert on this topic. And then people are asking me questions. I'm like, wait, could you repeat that one more time? And this conflict or this contrast between what we think we're supposed to be like and what's actually going on it's just interesting. But what's really powerful is accepting where we don't know something, or accepting the reality of a situation. It feels like that's the most powerful thing we can do, is just being really honest. I think a lot of my headaches become because of this tension, thinking I shouldn't have a headache. It can just linger for a long time. Oh, I shouldn't. But if you finally just like, oh, headache, fascinating. Everybody experiences headaches sometimes, right? Interesting. Oh, this is what a headache feels like. Or, oh, I have no idea what you're talking about. This is what everybody experiences. This is like I come into a work meeting and they're bringing me their worst problems. And then I'm like, I have no idea the answer to your problems. But what that means is that we can then empathize with them, and we can acknowledge, okay, so we don't know yet, but maybe we can experiment. And you can begin from that very humble place of being thrown into a situation that's difficult, and then you can begin to work from there, as opposed to denying that difficult situation. So it's unusually hard for us as human beings to accept reality, to accept what's actually going on. But it feels like the most powerful thing we can possibly do is just being totally open to what's actually happening, our feelings, our awareness, and so forth. And then from there, the self-compassion is what makes us want to help ourselves, free ourselves. And it's very much the same as extending compassion to others. Okay, so it's a long recap of mindfulness and self-compassion. But leading into this topic of motivation, I'm going to share my screen again a little bit. So I mentioned that there is this sixfold framework, beginning with mindfulness, self-awareness, self-management, including self-compassion. But then when we look at motivation is the ability to direct our own energies towards a goal. And the world assumes that we should be able to do that. And if you, because this is what enables us to get stuff done, whether it's hobbies or, just doing the dishes or doing stuff at work or whatever, exercising, motivation is a lot of what people talk about in the world, right? Like, you need to be motivated to get things done. The interesting thing is that motivation is a bit tricky. It's a lot slipperier than it feels like it should be. It can be very hard to really get motivated and stay motivated. And so what you find is that when they do surveys on engagement at work, like this famous survey that the Gallup Corporation has done for many years on level of employee engagement at work, they tend to every year find about 30% of employees are engaged, meaning they really like what they're doing. They're motivated to come to work. They wake up, looking forward to going to work. And that leaves the remaining 70% of people not particularly engaged. And some percentage of employees, I think it's normally something like 15 or 20%, are what you'd call actively disengaged, which means they actually intentionally drag their feet or make things a little bit worse. They're talk about the boss behind their back or try to undermine, talk about how stupid these projects are and these kinds of things. So companies struggle with trying to figure out how to get their employees to be engaged. But we, as individuals, we also struggle to stay motivated, right? Motivated to meditate or to exercise or keep it, whatever you're trying to do in your life. So motivation has these three aspects: alignment, envisioning, and resilience. And if I talk through these, I think they'll be a little bit more clear. So alignment, motivation, you can only be motivated towards something if it really aligns with something that you're interested in, right? It's got to line up with something that you're interested in. If somebody asks you to do something that you just have no interest in at all, like they say, hey, can you help me with my accounting project, and you just have no interest or skill in accounting, you're like, no, I don't think so. So alignment, there has to be the challenge at hand has to align in some way with our internal motivations. And just getting those things to line up is tricky. And a lot of what people talk about in terms of getting motivated to exercise or whatever talks about how to align the things that you do care about. Like, do you want to feel good when you wake up? Well, yes. Then, exercise on some recurring basis is a powerful way of helping you to feel better. So you're aligning what you currently care about, what you currently want, with this activity, and that's what alignment is about. And envisioning is a fascinating one. Envisioning means that we're always chasing a vision of something, a dream. We're always chasing a dream of something, and you can see a lot of how this works with advertisements. When you look at advertisements, they're always sort of casting out this picture of what life could be like. If you were so carefree, if you were on this, vacation, what would it be like if you were there? And so we're always casting out some vision of the future. And even when we fantasize or imagine about something, it's always imagining what would the future state be? What would that future state be like? It's very, very powerful for us to get a vision of the future, because that helps us to align our energies further and sustain that motivation. And then the final part of motivation is resilience, because it's very, very easy for us to become discouraged. Things we try and we don't succeed, we do something different, right? That's a very natural thing. And so for us to persevere in the face of difficulties, whatever it is, there has to be some resilience, and resilience itself is a bit of a skill. So alignment, this aspect, depends on understanding yourself and then the needs around you. Or if you're trying to motivate yourself, you need to understand yourself. And there's a concept in this that's very, very popular. I remember I read the book literally called Flow in the 80s. And flow is a concept by a Hungarian psychologist named Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. And he was one of the first people to really get started with positive psychology. He's one of the very early people to talk about positive psychology. A lot of psychology talks about pathology, right? What are your different mental pathologies? But increasingly over the last few decades, psychology has been talking about positive psychology. And one of the most popular concepts is this concept of flow. Now, you may or may not have heard the concept, but you will get it, right? If you think about what is your very, very favorite thing to do that's kind of challenging. I used to love, so there's many things in my life that I found flow in doing. When I was a little kid, I would play Dungeons and Dragons, right? This game when I was a little kid. And then I got into playing video games, and that was really fun. And then I got into math. I experienced a sense of flow with math, and then some computer programming. And it's interesting because you're concentrating. And when you're really concentrating on something, then you get totally drawn into it. When you're really concentrating strongly on something, you're totally drawn into it. And then I got into martial arts and got a feeling of flow in that. And then I got into meditation, got a feeling of flow with that. And it's sort of gone like that, where over the course of my life, I found these things that I just really love. I get into them. I have a great time. And for you, maybe it's doing yoga, maybe it's, writing, maybe it's, whatever it is, doing sales process, or, just playing with your dog. There's all these things. So interestingly, there's a whole spectrum on this, but the two axes here, increasing difficulty going up, and then increasing time and skill required over here. So what happens is if you're given a challenge that's too hard, too difficult, your reaction is stress. You find yourself in this area of stress. If you're given something that's too easy, you find yourself to be bored, right? So if something takes, if you have a lot of skill, let me rephrase this bottom axis. If you have a lot of skill in something, then what used to be challenging down here becomes boring, and you need greater and greater challenges over time to stay interested in something. So that's why it kind of goes up and to the right like this. Optimum flow is you learn the basics of something, and then you get good at the basics, and then you take on a next level of challenge and a next level of challenge and a next level of challenge. Yoga is like that. Computer programming is like that. Reading books is like that. And when you're in this state of flow, what happens, the experience is of an experience of concentration. And that's actually what you're getting, what you're feeling is what traditionally meditators have called concentration. So an experience of concentration is one in which you get totally absorbed into what you're doing. And the word concentration is kind of problematic, right? Because it makes us think, okay, concentration is like narrow, like, okay, concentrate on some fine point. But concentration is not like that. Concentration is not you take your big mind and try to squeeze it down into one small thing. Concentration is you take your big mind and you become utterly fascinated with what you're doing, so much that that thing you're doing expands to encompass your entire universe. right? Um, and I'm fishing here, hoping that perhaps you know this experience. Hopefully this is making some sense, but I'll love to get your feedback afterwards. But um, I think we have that experience. We have that experience even when we're watching a movie, right? If you get into a movie, you're absorbed. And the interesting thing these days, you can watch a movie on your phone, this tiny little window, right? But you have this tiny little thing, but you get absorbed into that. You get drawn into that world, and the rest of the universe disappears. Everybody has that experience. Same if you're reading a book, right? These tiny, few words at a time. It looks from one point of view like your attention is very, very narrow. But from your internal subjective point of view, what happens is the rest of the world disappears and you absorb into what you're focusing on, and you're engaged, you stay in it. And so if you're doing yoga at some point, once you really get the basics down, then you can begin to forget about your surroundings. You're not paying attention. Your self-consciousness disappears. You're not worried about how people are thinking about you. And you're just focused on, like, what's that next move? What's that next experience? Can I stretch and get the maximum benefit that I can from each posture and so forth? If you're doing writing, you just get drawn into it. And it can take time for us to get into an activity. You have to sort of ease our mind in and sort of load our attention up with what's going on. And it can sometimes take, often they say it takes 20 minutes, up to 20 minutes when we switch between one activity and another for us to get fully absorbed into it. But when you're in that state, you love it, right? So if I ask what's your favorite parts of your job, my guess is that there are things where you find a sense of flow in those activities. And the reason flow is powerful is because it becomes self-motivating. If you can get yourself into a state of flow, if you find that aspect of your job that you really get into and you can concentrate on it, it's naturally self-motivating. And you can, and that's what allows people to be great artists, great writers, great salespeople, whatever they are, great testers and so forth, because they love what they're doing. They get into it. And that's the real, that's a victory in terms of alignment, where you can align your skills with the challenges you're being faced with and have an experience of flow and sustain that. That's where getting to know yourself and finding that including getting to know your own mental energy levels and your attention and how you can focus and not be distracted and so forth. All of these things are skills that lead into being able to experience more and more of that sense of flow. Okay, so why don't I just take a minute or two? Do you have any questions about that? Is that aligned? Does that connect? Do you have things that come to mind when I describe that you get into?
You see my reference to Goldilocks and the Three Bears?
Oh, yeah. It's a good one, right? Not too hard, not too soft, not too difficult, not too easy. Goldilocks, yeah. Exactly.
Andrew, probably we can discuss this later, but the main point that you started with, motivation, was something that you are aligned with and something which excites you. So for something like doing exercise, if I talk about going to gym or doing exercise, that's not necessarily something I'm excited about, but that's something I should do. I should be concentrating on eating right, doing exercise regularly, and being motivated or not motivated, being disciplined to do that, because that's good for me, but I really do not enjoy it. I'm just doing it because I have to do it. So what do you think about those sort of activities? How do you get motivated about them?
Well, so it sounds like, I'm not the world's best expert on exercise motivation, so you can probably find other people with better advice. But in my experience, you are finding some reward already. Like you have some sense of deferred gratification. You have some sense in which you can motivate yourself to do things that are uncomfortable in the moment. And that is a level of maturity that you've developed to some degree. And that's the ability to postpone temporary enjoyments like sitting on the couch with a bag of popcorn for long-term enjoyments like a feeling of vitality and health. And we get an enjoyment even by the small victories of just putting our shoes on to go, go exercise, go walk or run or whatever. So even these little victories that we have along the way, that gives us some sense of satisfaction. So there's some reward, there's some internal reward we're getting even in the moment. And that reward is the reward of having an intention and then carrying it out. And then, okay, good job, me. And we know it's going to be difficult, but you actually come to value your own patience and persistence and the joy of being patient and persistent more than begins to override the pain and discomfort of exercise. And so on balance, you've figured out how to shift your feelings towards exercise so that even though it remains maybe uncomfortable, you pay less and less and less attention to the discomfort and more attention to the future results or the fact that you're carrying out your intention or you're listening to a podcast or something. You get something to shift your attention towards things that you do find pleasant and enjoyable. Okay, let's give some time for meditation here at the end, and then I'm delighted if we want to chat at the end, sort of break out and discuss more on this topic, because I think it's a very rich one. Okay, so in terms of a final meditation, what we can do is meditate on this sense of flow, just asking ourselves, where is it that we experience that flow, and giving ourselves some encouragement to enrich that in our life. So we again begin with our breath and just coming back to our body if we've lost track. Taking a deep breath in and out. And then breathing again just to have a sense of relaxation. And then we can ask ourselves, where in my life do I experience a sense of flow? What are the activities that are challenging, but not too challenging, where I can absorb and really get into them? Then we can ask ourselves, how can we nurture and cultivate these experiences in our daily life so that we give more energy for them and find ways to align them with the other things we need to do in our life? How can we align the needs around us, including the need to make money or do chores and so forth? How can we align these with the things that we find joyful? And by thinking of the things in our life that bring us a sense of flow, can we even feel that in our body? How does that feel in our body? Just even imagining the things we really enjoy doing. Just ask ourselves, how does that feel, even physically? And by noticing how these activities, these mental states, they manifest in our body, a sense of flow manifests as a special feeling in our body, we can become more aware of how our body is always giving us signals. It's always trying to tell us if we are aligned and moving in the right direction. And then we can reflect briefly that even in this short time here, we have changed our mind. Our mind has changed in different ways. And just imagine what kinds of results could unfold from the small actions we've taken of being here and listening, paying attention, meditating today. What kinds of good results could unfold for ourselves and others? And then we can open our eyes and relax our concentration. Okay. So one little procedural note. I'm going to make a change to the Zoom link that you click to get into this. So for future sessions next Tuesday, next Saturday, whatever, just click the latest link in the calendar entry because that'll update a little bit to hopefully get rid of the waiting room that sometimes some of you get caught into when you first join. So I'm going to